Welcome to the UW Demonstration Sites Inclusionary Practices Project highlighting Monroe High School and School District. First, let's start with a little background information about the Inclusionary Practices Project. In a statewide effort to improve inclusionary practices across Washington State, after Washington State ranked 44th in our nation out of 50 states for least inclusive states based on LRE data. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. As part of the IPP, the UW Herring Center partnered with OSPI, you can see that there in the third column or the third row, to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington State. And now you'll see in the fall, the IPP is becoming the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network, and this change reflects the Washington State continued commitment to inclusive schools and districts and recognizing the need to continue and to build and leverage statewide partnerships. And you can learn more about the project with the QR code on the bottom right. The demonstration, we currently have 15 demonstration sites across Washington State, and the project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. You can see our demonstration sites represent the diversity of Washington State with urban and rural sites in some of our smallest and larger school districts. Our demonstration sites highlight model inclusive sites. They showcase implementation of high leverage practices, and they host visits to share practices in action and increase equitable learning for all students. And the idea here is that when sites open their doors to others, that they can come and learn, engage, and see practices firsthand and connect with educators. We recognize that inclusive education is a cultural shift, and we all have a role to play in dismantling barriers in order to create more inclusive schools. That said, we prioritize collaboration and diverse contributions to strengthen outcomes for all students, asset-based approaches to organizational and systems change, transformational change through sharing stories, cycles of continuous improvement on the journey towards inclusive schools, and innovative leadership across our system. We do recognize that demonstration sites are each on their own inclusive journey, and that whatever those high leverage moves are aligned to the individual school and district cultures and to their own priorities. And we also recognize that increasing district scale and sustainability are critical for lasting impacts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Noah Wallace to introduce Monroe High School. Thanks, Noah.
Thanks, Jean Marie. Thanks everybody who's watching this. This is Monroe High School. You see the image. We love it. We love our high school. We have some staff members here. So just want to introduce a few people that you see on your screen. Brett Willie is our principal. Say hi, Brett. You can wave your hand. I guess they see your name. Matt Chalfant is one of our math co-teachers. Been here for a big chunk of the journey. Krista Gogan is one of our Structured Learning Center teachers. And I'm one of the assistant principals who works with our special educators. We also have David Parator here, who is student service director at the district, and looking forward to everyone's gonna have a chance to share a little bit, and we are excited to go over some of our high leverage moves that we've done. A little bit about our school first. So some of our demographics, just want to start out, one of our sayings around here is all means all. We really try to instill a belief that every student that walks through our doors, no matter what their background might be, can learn at a high level, can rise to high expectations, and that's, you'll see a little bit more about that, how we live that out day to day. But just for the sake of getting to know us, you'll see some stats there. So we're 56% of our students are white, 32% are Latino, 7% two or more races. We are currently at 12% of our students receive multi-language learner identification, and services. That's actually been, for us at least, part of our journey, a 50% increase of students receiving those services in the last 3 years. We have 50% of our student population receiving special education services. 39% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and that's about a 25% increase since 2020, and 5% qualify for McKinney-Vento services. And Brett's going to take us into a little bit about our foundation and vision and kind of where this all started.
Well, thank you, Noah. Thanks again to all of you who are watching our presentation here. I also want to thank the University of Washington and their team for just an amazing level of support they have provided us on our journey. It's really an honor and a privilege for us to share it's just part of our story with you. Obviously, we can't get too into the weeds, but hopefully we can share a few things that'll be helpful. A couple things I want to start out by just sharing off the start is we are far from perfect. We are on a journey. This is definitely a continuous journey of improvement. And I think the more we learn and the better we feel like we're getting, the more we realize we have a long way to go and a lot more to learn. So we are excited about the things we're doing, and also know there's a lot of things that aren't where we want them. And so we're constantly continuing to try to improve in those areas. And I'd say the other piece, just to start out with, is just reminding our viewers that we're still in a transition phase between, kind of a one-size-fits-all traditional approach to school, which is very common for high schools, into a kind of a system where we're trying to meet the needs of every single student. And when we're in a system built for sort of traditions and one-size-fit-all, it's a really hard shift to go through. And I think that speaks to the courage and the effort and just the belief of our staff, knowing that we're trying to do something better, and it just takes time. So I want to start with this slide. This is our why at Monroe High School. This is our mission. Our mission is high school plus for every single student. And essentially what that means is our kids, number one, we want them to graduate. That's kind of important at the high school level, is students getting their diploma. We also want to guarantee that not only do they get their diploma, but that diploma means they have acquired a certain number of skills that are going to help them be successful in whatever next steps they take after high school. We don't want the diploma to symbolize, just barely making it and, kind of collapsing across the finish line. We want that diploma to really represent this idea that our kids are ready. And nobody at our school would argue with that being our mission. It's a very worthy mission. I think the hard part is actually making it happen. And that's where, as a school, we have assessed kind of our current reality the last few years and really asking ourselves which students aren't on this trajectory for high school plus. And when we look at our own data, we see or two kind of subgroups emerge. Our students that are being served through our special education program. I think there's a gap there with that group of students, as well as our students that are in our MLL program. And those are our two kind of areas where we've really tried to move towards this inclusive idea so that those group of students can be on the same trajectory as everybody else. And I think I would just share from any school or district that is watching this, and no matter where you are in your journey, to me, I would say there's three really, really important things to remember. And you can go to the next slide here, and I'll share the next one. Sorry, I think they got a little out of order. Yeah, there you go. The first piece I would just share is how important teacher leadership is to this shift. And I think part of why we've been successful at making some improvements is we have a phenomenal group of teacher leaders in our building that are that are really behind this effort. You'll hear from 2 of them today. There's many more in our building, but it really does take our staff to be invested in this work, because it really is. It's not an initiative. It's something we believe is an imperative that we do here, and having staff leading the charge has been helpful. So I would say that's kind of one of the most important pieces starting out. The 2 other things that I think are really critical are represented here on this slide, and I'll start with the left side here, because really when you're talking about inclusive practices and becoming a school for all, very quickly, no matter what the conversation is about, you start to get pretty quickly into the beliefs land with all of us, and the things we believe about what schools should be, and what students are capable of, and what should and shouldn't happen. And I think it's really important to call out this idea that we can gather information and do a lot of learning and present the why, but beliefs very rarely change that way. In order to change our beliefs and really move a system, you have to try something different. So you got to have a new action, a new behavior, which will start to lead to better outcomes. And as those outcomes improve, that's what changes the beliefs of any of us. So oftentimes I think we can get trapped in this cycle of like spending all this time talking about beliefs, and we have to do that, but at some point we got to try something different. That's how beliefs change over time. And I think that's also represented in the visual on the right, of this youngster riding a bike. And if you think about the analogy of bike riding, you don't learn how to ride a bike by looking at it, by analyzing it, by learning about it. We learn how to ride a bike or any other skill by jumping on it and just doing it. And I think that is one of the things I feel like in our district and in our school we've done a good job of. We spend time learning, and then we jump and we go. And when you're riding a bike, you learn through trial and error, and hopefully there's a lot of support behind that. And sometimes you fall off and you pick yourself back up and you get back on it. And really, this visual kind of speaks to the idea that you have to just jump in and take a leap of faith and try something new, knowing you're going to learn a lot in the process. And I think oftentimes we can get trapped in this paralysis of analyzing the situation versus just, kind of ripping the Band-Aid and jumping on and getting started. So those 3 pieces, I think, for us have really caused us to make a lot of growth quickly. And a lot of that, again, is due to our amazing teacher leaders and this idea that we're going to try something new and we're going to get on and learn as we go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Chalfant. He's one of our phenomenal teacher leaders in the building and has been at Monroe High School for quite a long time and can kind of share a little bit more about our journey.
Thanks, Brett. Rena Marie, if you could go back 2 slides, that'd be awesome. Perfect. There you go. So as Brett was saying, I'm Matt Chalfant. I'm a special education teacher at Monroe High School. I have been along for the journey. This is my 16th year at Monroe. And I've really seen both ends of the spectrum now. As when I came in 2008, we were a full resource exclusion model, if you will, where students were pulled out of their classes and came to the resource room to receive their services in reading, writing, math, social, emotional, behavioral, you have it, right? And so we were kind of stuck in that model until about 2015, as you see on the slide there. And at that point, we actually had a principal before Brett that really kind of had this idea of like, hey, we're stuck here and our students are really being impacted in a negative way. And what I mean by that is that we were really doing a disservice to our kids, because kids who were coming into the resource room, they were, let's say, at a 3rd grade math level. We thought it was a great idea to teach them at a 3rd grade math level, and we weren't seeing any growth. And our students were becoming stagnant. And really, we were predetermining their pathway of graduation and life after high school. And we realized that we need to make a change. And I'll be honest, it was a little scary, just kind of the unknown. And I think Brett said it best, is that you just kind of got to jump in. And so that started in around 2015. I was a part of an algebra team where I started to co-teach a class with another one of our general education algebra teachers at Monroe High School. And we had out of a class of 30, we had about 10 students that were identified with IEPs, qualifying area of math. And I really went into it with an open mind, not knowing, what to expect, not having too many expectations other than we really wanted to push these kids to reach their full potential. And honestly, what we found out over the first few years is a lot of our students with the IEPs actually outperformed our students without an IEP. And it was really phenomenal to see that. We provided accommodations and modifications to all students in the classroom. So those kids did not feel singled out. And we saw time and time again that our students who were designated as an IEP student were thriving. And so each year we kind of took more and more steps towards this full inclusion. And now I'm proud to say, and very proud to be a part of this journey, that now in 2023, 2024 school year, we are full inclusion. And I'd be lying to say that it was all rosy and everything worked out according to plan, because it never does. But I would say this is that taking those steps day by day really has been a team effort. It takes courage and it takes all of us to work together. I would say that the one thing I've noticed over this inclusion journey is to have an open mind. We have had some staff members at times who have been, I don't want to say necessarily closed-minded, but I think that they were a little nervous of change and of what that looked like. And so if I could give you a piece of advice through our journey, is just to have that open mind and to know that the kids are going to surprise you. They really will when they're given the opportunity to actually thrive, and to know that the resource traditional model that we're so used to does not promote growth. It really doesn't. And so our journey has been fun. And I'll say we're nowhere near where we want to be. We still want to keep growing and getting better. But to see both ends of the spectrum, I would never go back. I would never go back to the full resource model. I just did not see the growth. The self-confidence in the kids is a huge piece of that as well. Seeing kids just with their peers, their confidence grows tremendously. So everyone's journey is a little bit different. But my advice to you is have some courage and take those steps. I'm going to pass it off to Noah now. He's going to go on with the next slide.
So just jumping in, thanks, Matt, to just kind of highlighting, 3 of the high leverage moves that have happened here at the high school that we feel like are among the most important things we do to try to get better at this process. The first is just this idea of our high school function as a professional learning community, as a PLC, and every teacher is part of a collaborative team. And I know that's not necessarily uncommon at schools across the state or even in the nation, the idea of your PLC or your teacher team. But we've really tried to implement a model where not only do we have teacher teams meeting maybe by a math level or by an English grade or something, but our special education teachers are also part of these collaborative teams, that they're not siloed off in their own team all the time, but they are amongst their gen ed teachers with the desire to work together to create a guaranteed and viable curriculum for every student, no matter whether they have a disability or not. And when we talk about a guaranteed and viable curriculum, that's this idea that by student, by standard, that all students have access to essential standards, and that we are guaranteeing that they will have access, and that teachers are working to answer these 4 essential questions about those essential standards. So essential standards is kind of these 4 questions. What do we want students to know and be able to do? So our collaborative teams are working to have that conversation. What are we saying that whether they have a disability or not, with advice from a special educator on the team and things of that nature, what are we saying that every student should be able to know to reach that goal of high school plus by the end of their high school career? What are those standards? We want our teams to also be talking about how will we know if they've learned it? So what are the formative assessments? What are the summative assessments that we are designing, again, with the special educators, teachers' input, with the idea of proactively having accommodations and modifications in line. But what is the system we're using to see if our students are making progress or what they've learned of the essentials? Third question is amongst the most important. What do we do if they don't learn it? So we have teacher teams talking about that question. And then what do we do if they do? How do we extend the learning? And so we have teacher teams tackling that question very consistently, and it's a huge part of the DNA of our high school. And we are working on ensuring that the beliefs are such, both with students and staff, that whether you have a disability or not, like I said before, that this is a guaranteed viable curriculum for every student. And so it's really helpful to have our special education teachers on teams like that, because we've also done a lot of work around IEP goals that we have IEP teams discussing. I'm a former special education teacher, and it was not uncommon to have goals written for high schoolers at the 2nd or 3rd grade level. And that isn't necessarily always a bad thing, or not that it never happens, but really working to have special education teachers be part of the gen ed content that's being delivered, and then coming back to those IEP teams, say, hey, like, what if we wrote some IEP goals? What if we had goals aligned to grade level standards, and we still track by student, by standard, in line with the IEP, how students are progressing on those grade level goals when appropriate. And that's from a special education perspective, as far as how this all aligns, that's really helpful, so that you don't have students receiving their services in a gen ed on level class, and then having to go track data on a goal on the IEP that's maybe 6 or 7 grade levels below. So that's obviously dependent on IEP team conversations and student, but that's really been a helpful part of having our collaborative teams be what they are. And then our second high leverage move, I'm going to throw it back to Matt again to talk about the idea of our specific co-teach teams and how they co-plan.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So yeah, it's really important to have that common co-planning period with your general education partner, classroom teacher, because what it allows you to do is it allows you guys to work together to make sure that you are providing necessary accommodations, modifications on assignments. I think a big kind of false narrative of inclusionary practices is that the special education teacher has to be an expert in the content field. And I see that as kind of a fear factor, if you will. And so I'm here to tell you right now that as a special education teacher, you are going to be the accessibility expert. And so you do not. So for example, I'm in the math department working with them. I am by no means a math expert. But my job, what I am really good at, is I'm really good at breaking down and helping the kids, coach them on the material and help them to build the skills that they need. And so I just want to give you guys just that courage to understand that no, you don't need to be a math expert, a writing expert, an English expert, what have you. But what you are bringing to the table is that ability to break down the assignments, and that's what the co-planning allows you to do. So for right now, for example, Brett, our principal, has done a fantastic job of aligning the master schedule. So I have my co-planning periods with my co-teaching partners. And so do we meet every day? No, not necessarily. But weekly, yes. We'll meet, for a good chunk of period, talk about the upcoming lessons. We have our PLC. We're a PLC driven school. And so during those times, our collaborative times, we'll look at our assessments, both formative and summative. And I'll give my feedback on, hey, this is looking great, or hey, we need to take a look and tweak this, make this more accessible. And these are the access points, if you will. And so that's what this co-planning period and time really has allowed us to do, to really help kids meet those standards. We're really looking at the standards and making sure that they can reach those. Yeah, and I think a good classroom, as far as if you were to walk into Monroe High School, as far as co-teaching goes, that it'd be tough for you to recognize who is the lead teacher versus the co-teacher. I think that's our goal, is we want, anyone who walks in to not know who's who. Are we perfect in that? No. But I think a good co-taught classroom is both teachers leading the way. Both teachers are leaders or coaches and helping kids reach those standards and reach those goals. And then the last point in there, you can see it's just absolutely necessary. It is. So whoever, if you're watching this in the principal position, really work hard to make that master schedule work to align those planned periods is absolutely critical. All right, and I'm gonna send it back to Noah, I believe.
I think it's
Brett
me
did take this
actually.
one.
I think it's me on the
Both of you.
master schedule stuff. Yep.
All
So our third inclusive practice is just having a really solid master schedule. And for those that come visit, happy to kind of show you what that looks like. I think, you know, when you commit to all as a school, one of the places that it shows up, if you're actually committed to that, is in the master schedule. And unfortunately, to do it well, it takes a tremendous amount of work and effort. But it's worth it. It's just really hard. And so we've really tried to make sure our master schedule is set up to help our students be successful. And I think here's what I would say to think about. We know that our the skills kids need are found in the standards that they're learning. Our goal is that every student reaches grade level. We're not there, but that's what we're shooting for. So it's impossible for a student to have a shot at reaching grade level and acquiring those essential skills if they're not in a grade level class. So at Monroe High School, all students receive grade level instruction. They're gen ed students first, and they're in their grade level class. Some students need a little bit more support, and so they might have an extra class where they're getting something in addition to, but we don't have students that are getting replacement classes. They're in learning with their peers, and if they need more time and support, then we figure out what that looks like. Because we know if they graduate and they don't have those skills, that we've set them up to fail. And I think one of the pieces, as Matt mentioned, that has been really critical in our master schedule is to make sure that our co-teachers have common planning so that they can work together to make sure that all students have access to those grade level skills. I want to show one visual that just kind of represents the shift we've made. And we have a phenomenal math team. They're some of the finest educators I've ever worked with. And as you know, in high schools are really good at ranking and sorting students and kind of playing that game. That is very common in schools. And this visual represents kind of how we used to think about students, particularly in math, traveling through our system. This was a very, very well thought out, planned, pretty dialed in way of saying which class did the student have the year before, what were their student behaviors, and then where are they going next year. And we had at one point in time just lots of levels of classes within each year of math. And so this particular visual is just for 11th grade, kind of this pretty unique flow chart, or pretty not unique, but pretty well thought flow chart out for where kids would go. And what we have kind of learned is if we want to be a school for all, we have to make sure every student is getting the same thing. And then if students need more time and support, then we can do that in addition to, but it's not going to be this kind of ranking and sorting approach. So if you go to the next slide, this is what our flow chart for high school math looks like now. You can see it's much more simple. All students get Algebra 1. All students get geometry. Everybody gets Algebra 2. That is the one grade level where we do have an honors version. And then if students are really struggling in math, we might provide them with an extra math support class. But every single student is in with their peers. And so I think this kind of just demonstrates the shift, especially at a high school, that you have to make of kind of moving away from this idea of ranking and sorting and putting students in levels and grouping students at a similar level altogether, and really have all students learning in this more, everybody gets the same thing kind of idea. And then if there's students that are still needing a little extra help, then we figure out how to do that in addition to, but it's not a replacement of. And it's just a really critical part of this work is having a master schedule that is really well thought out and planned. And part of how we do that is this continuum of services where we collect information on what kids need. And Matt is going to briefly just share kind of how that works when you're building a schedule.
Yeah, so you can see it's broken down into, math, ELA, or organizational, executive functioning, and social emotional. So as far as the continuum goes, we actually don't, for the math, the pre-algebra, we phased that out last year. So that was our last year of pre-algebra. And I know that was a lot of people were nervous about that because, you know, kids, if they weren't ready to go to algebra, how did we know? I can tell you as a fact right now, because I have a lot of these students who were in pre-algebra last year, they were ready for Algebra 1. And I have them in there right now and they are thriving. They're doing well. So I just wanted to just throw that out there with the math piece that you don't have to have pre-algebra. But as far as these classes go, what we do as a team is we break down, we look, obviously student schedule is going to be IEP driven. So we're going to look at, you know, where are their services, where are their minutes and so forth. And from there, we build out our continuum of services. You know, we look at, does a student need para support versus like a co-teach? So a para support would be not as much, you know, hands-on type support versus a co-teach is more where you have the special education co-teacher in there, maybe a little more intensive support. And those are IEP team decisions, and that's driven by that. But yeah, we do that for the math. We do that for the ELA, so for the reading and writing services. One of the things I love that we do at Monroe High School is we have an intervention period, if you will. We call it our flex period. It's kind of tied to a homeroom. And what we have done is we've used those and utilized those periods to help serve minutes for students for organizational support, for executive functioning, for social emotional. So that way they're not being pulled out of their general education classes to receive that support. For example, I taught a class at Monroe High School called Decision Management for 9 years. In that class, although it was great, it was for students with behavioral needs, organizational needs, social emotional. It just wasn't providing what they really needed. And so this type of model where you can set up groups through our intervention period where kids can come in and receive intense 15, 20 minutes social emotional support or behavior and so forth. So the way we have set that up with that intervention period is highly recommended. However, your school plans to do that, but that's kind of how we've gone about doing that. Like Brett said, we don't have replacement type classes. We have in addition to. So for the organizational executive functioning, we do have 2 academic success classes that we run for kids who need that executive functioning support. When I told you about the spectrum when we had both ends and I was in the resource, I believe we had 6 or 7 of those courses running for the academic success. I think we're down to 1 or 2 now. So we have really lowered our LRE percentages on that, which is, you want those numbers to definitely, support the kids being out in the gen ed classrooms, right? So, but you can see that we also did the ELA. One of the things we have is a co-teach plus ELA support lab. The support lab is for students who do need some more intensive support with reading and writing. We're down to just 1 of those this year. So once again, we're on a journey. We're not perfect and we're still cutting back and trying to be more and more inclusive in everything that we do. But that's just kind of how we take a look at it. Once again, it's IEP driven, but where you see flex time on there, that's MHS's intervention period. And I highly recommend, like I said, something like that for your school as well. So I'm gonna pass it off. I believe Krista, you're up next to talk about SLC.
So I'm Krista Gogan, one of the 2 structured learning centers, special education teachers. We serve typically the students that need the most support during the day to access their academics. And we've made some changes in our program that have really seen kids succeed, make a lot of growth, and are attending more gen ed classes successfully through the day. One of the changes we made is during our tier 1 support, our flex time for our school, we really focused on our social skill lessons and social emotional learning. And we have gen ed kids coming in, working as peer mentors during that time. And then we also have students enrolled in various elective classes that they choose. We have students out in graphic design, civics, plant biology, yoga, weightlifting, and they attend those classes sometimes independently and sometimes they attend them with support of a paraeducator. We also have students enrolled in the co-teach classes that we offer here at Monroe High School, including English per their grade level, Art 2, Algebra, and Geometry. And they're being super successful in their geometry and algebra classes. And we also have students that are in our SLC program that participate in extracurricular activities, including cheerleading, football, cross country, and track. And Ashley Castillo, the other SLC teacher, and I, this is our first year of co-teaching other classes. So this year I'm working with one of our art teachers, co-teaching art 2. And we're seeing students just really engage, being able to participate more, and just having kind of that positive culture in the art 2 class. And then next semester, my co-teacher Ashley will be out teaching leadership. A lot of the change and success that we've been seeing is just having 2 teachers like really working together and having a collaborative classroom and a program, not 2 separate classrooms. And students have just more access to peers that way. It just creates a safe, positive learning environment where we have high standards for all of our students, and we've seen that they can rise to meet those expectations time and again. And we have peer mentors that come in about 4 out of 8 periods a day. Sometimes we have 3 in our class at a time. So it's really helpful to us and helpful to the students, that just to see how we can all work together, we learn a little bit differently. And I feel like our peer mentors are leaving our classroom with a positive experience, and they've learned a lot during their time here as well. We are working with new curriculum that allows for standard aligned teaching of graduation required classes, and we integrate their IEP goal work into that work. We use News to You for our English language arts. We use Unique Learning for civics, and then we also use attainments for our science curriculum. So overall, I think we have a very successful SLC program. Our students, I feel like, are very involved in the school, and our leadership has helped a lot with that, but just the culture of the school is changing, and I feel like our students here in SLC have played a large part in that. So I'm going to pass it off to David Parator.
Thanks, Krista. And I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize that while Monroe High School has been courageous in opening up their school and their practice for having visitors come and be a demonstration site for all of Washington, the work that they're doing is representative of the work that we're doing across our system. Matt talked about it a little bit. Previously, when this is my 9th year in the school district, when I first came into the district, our district was more traditional in their provision of special education services, where elementary was primarily pull-out services for special education services, and then middle school and high school was more replacement classes. So over the last 9 years, with the leadership of all of our building principals, as well as our general education teachers and special education teachers at each of the sites, we've really built out our inclusive practices and co-teach models. So we're providing that kindergarten through high school. So we've really, it's not a separate initiative. It's becoming more and more of what we do in Monroe School District. As we built this process out, Hidden River Middle School became a demonstration site in 2019. And one of the important things I think to consider when you're looking at the work system-wise is you need the services to be provided all through the system, so that when students are having one experience in elementary school, that experience then continues as they progress to middle school and then high school, and that where they receive their services doesn't change just because they are matriculating up from elementary to secondary programs. So the teams have talked about it, a couple of these areas. One of the things, again, inclusive practices is not a separate initiative. It is what we do. Our district is becoming more and more of a professional learning community school district. So all of our special education teachers throughout the system, elementary through high school, our special education providers are participating on those collaborative teams with their general education teaching partners, so that we're always considering our students who have different learning styles when we're developing lessons, where we're looking at our data, and when we're determining what sort of interventions need to be provided. And that would be for our students on IEPs, as well as our multilingual learner students, as well as students also with who don't have identified disabilities. At the secondary level, it was a huge lift for the school to rework their master schedule, and that really was the critical piece in moving Monroe High School to that next level of really providing those inclusive practice opportunities for the staff and students. One of the things that we're building out as a district also is building out some of those inclusive opportunities for our students before they become kindergarten. So as a district, we're opening up additional transitional kindergarten sites where students with disabilities are able to have some opportunities with their general education peers before they reach kindergarten, so that it's not just a separate learning experience when they're preschool students. And so that's an area of growth where we're continuing to build out those opportunities. Also, when we're looking at our students who have identified disabilities, students are no longer just in their special education classroom. So when we have an emergency or an emergency drill across our system, we need all of our staff to understand what those learning needs are for our students with either identified or non-identified disabilities. So our teams now also have a process where they're looking at students on IEPs and really thinking intentionally when we get to their emergency planning, what sort of accommodations do our general education teachers, our paraeducators, all staff need to be considering when they're providing if there is an emergency that happens. So really, again, it's looking at the comprehensive school system for getting those services in place. And finally, an area of growth as well is in building out those inclusive opportunities for our students with disabilities to also be able to participate in more athletic opportunities with their non-disabled peers. So this year we are building out our unified or cooperative sports opportunities, and it's our hope to be able to we're going to dip our toe in it this year in the area of basketball. And so that is an area of continued growth for our district, just overall as a system to be creating as many opportunities for our students with disabilities as possible. So I'll end it there, and I think I'm turning it back over to Rena Marie here to close us out.
Yes, thank you so much, David, there then for just sharing a bit about our district scale and kind of building that capacity. I'm hearing that vertical continuum of supports and that vertical alignment too. So all students in Monroe School District, whatever school they may go to, are going to be able to receive these really strong inclusionary practices too. I can't say enough how grateful I am to Monroe High School and the district. Thanks for Brett, Noah, Matt, and Krista for sharing your story today. And I think what this really highlights as well is just this long-term move, right? Like systems change, it's just slow and steady. And so I'm hoping what people hear today or will learn more when they come and visit Monroe High School. I've shared the link there that you can see their IPP website page that has artifacts that you can go ahead and access to, but just the long-term planning too, and to just be, there's a lot of intentional moves that they're making, but just really bold with those systems change. And sometimes it's really hard for lots of reasons to dismantle ineffective systems. And what I really appreciated early on, they said, right, what some of these things, these practices in place aren't what's best for our students, aren't what's best for teachers, and starting to dismantle those and where to leverage, where to look, and Brett shared looking at that 9th grade math. So I think about wherever you might be, where as you do some resource mapping in your own school or district, where those needs are, and begin to see kind of where your next right moves are, where kind of your beginning moves. And again, really thankful this project started in 2019. Monroe High School and Hidden River Middle School were partners from the beginning of this project, and we're really pleased to recognize and welcome Monroe High School as a demonstration site this year to open their doors. And I appreciate that vulnerability to share your story, but it's definitely been impactful for educators, community members, family members, not just in Washington State, but beyond. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Rena Marie.